Hello, welcome to Quilt Artistry. Today we are going to be working on the Sweet Dreams mermaid tails for little girls. And I'm going to show you guys, one, how to set it up on the screen, two, how to set it up on the quilt frame, and then how to finish it off on the domestic machine. We're going to start by looking at the screen. As you can see, Sweet Dreams offers us 4 different sizes of these mermaid tails. We have the large down at the bottom. This large one stitches in 4 separate pieces and can be made into an adult size. That's the extra large. The regular large is 60 inches by 23 inches. The small is 50 inches by 20 inches. And the extra small is 23 inches by 12 inches. Now, the way these work is you pick the size that is closest to the size that you want to make, and then you scale it up or down slightly to make it the size that you need. If we take a look at my fabric here, come on down here and take a look at this. Okay, so on my frame, I have Minky fabric loaded, First let me tell you a little bit about why I like the Minky fabric. Number one, you don't have to use batting with this at all. It leaves a very nice soft plush interior for these mermaids, for the kids, and they really like that because it's soft and cozy. I have this Minky is 88 or 90 inches wide, so I'm going to stitch 2 of my mermaid tails side by side on just one width. So that means that I'm going to have to scale one of these down. And I think what I want, let me see here, what I want is the medium size, or the small here, which is the 50 inches by 19 inches. So I'm going to take that, and actually I've already done it. I have scaled this to the size that I want, which is about 40 and a half inches. I'm going to delete these others that are on my screen. So I have this one that is 40 and a half inches, 40.65 by 50, 15.58. And now we're going to get this set up on screen. So, again, I kind of go back and forth a little bit, I know. When you load Minky on your frame, you want the selvage to be down on the sides, and you want your cut edge to be up along the top. The reason why you do this is because there is no stretch in the Minky where the selvage is from top to bottom. All of the stretch will be contained from left to right of the machine. So you put your cut edge at the top, you put your selvage on the side, and then when you are rolling this, you won't get any of that weird stretch, and when you take it off the frame, it will not be distorted. So I have my Minky loaded as my backing. I have the selvage on the side, and I have, this is like dressmaker satin, and I have it loaded. It is just pinned just below my red snappers here. And now I'm going to put my clamps on this. I have the Gamble quilt clamps. If you haven't tried these, they are super speedy. I love them. Okay, now that I have that on, I'm going to go ahead and put my side clamps on just to hold this up. Okay, So we have everything set up with the fabric loaded and everything is on the machine or on the statler. So the first thing that we're going to do is define a boundary of where we're going to stitch this. So I go to the top here and I click draw boundary. And what we want to do is we're just going to click out the 4 corners where our fabric is. So we have a 1. I usually click right in front of my clamps to make sure that I'm not going to hit those. We'll go all the way across the bottom here. Once in the middle. And then I click right underneath my pins so that I don't accidentally stitch into them. I don't want the machine head to get close to those. And then we'll close the boundary. So now, looking at the screen, what I'm going to do is pick up the mermaid tail and put it inside the boundary. And I can see that fits quite nicely. I'm going to move it over to kind of save space. Now, once we have that inside the boundary, we're going to have the machine stitch it. Oh, and I should say we need 2 copies of this mermaid tail because one is going to stitch the front and the other one's going to stitch the back. So I'm going to go ahead and make a copy of this one before I do anything. Okay, so I'm going to do a rubber stamp. And I'm just going to put it right next to it, which is where we're going to stitch the other one. And I'm going to toggle this unsewn, or sewn. So we're going to turn that red, and then that way we don't have to worry about that until after the first one is stitched. So now we're going to have the machine go ahead and start stitching. And I'm going to let it stitch a little bit, and then we're going to cut the video and come back. That way we don't have to watch the whole thing stitch out. So once you have it all set up, it's really pretty easy to do these mermaid tails. It just takes a little bit of time in stitching. And let's see here. Also, I want to show you guys what the pattern properties are on this. So I have this set to stitch at a speed of 12 with an SPI of 12. That's 12 stitches per inch at a speed of 12. You can stitch faster if you want. If you have a Statler Ascend, you're welcome to stitch it much, much faster. I don't really get in a hurry, so I just leave it on between 12 and 15 is kind of my happy speed number when I'm doing this. So let me close out of this. Okay. Now we're going to go ahead and hit the start button. So you're just going to bring up your bobbin thread just like normal, press the go-go button, and let it start stitching. This is a very slow process, watching it stitch. It stitches this whole thing out in sections. And the first part that it's going to stitch out is going to be the scales for the mermaid. So we're going to let it stitch all of the scales, and when it gets down to, show the screen, when it gets down to the bottom of the scales, like just above the mermaid tail, it's going to stop, and it's going to prompt us to add the secondary fabric for the mermaid tail. So we'll come back when we are close to the end of that, and I'll show you guys how to do that part. Cut. We're almost down to the end. I'm going to let it finish stitching the last 2 rows of the scales, and then we'll add the fabric. Okay, I guess I only had 1 row left. Okay, so once it gets to this point, show the screen and zoom in on the upper corner of the tail. Okay, so when it gets to this point where it stops, it's prompting you to add the additional fabric for the mermaid tail. Now, you can do these mermaid tails, you can make them with the separate fabric for the tail, or you can just do one color altogether. Today, I'm going to add the fabric for the tail. So I have an additional piece of satin in a contrasting color. You want it to be different so that it stands out against the color of the mermaid. So you take your extra fabric and we're just going to pin it in place. I can move this out of the way. We're just going to put a couple pins in here just to hold it in place. And I should say, I cut this fabric at 18 inches for the mermaid tail for the size that I am stitching. You want to measure that before you start stitching to make sure you know what size to cut this this fabric. Now I'm going to put it under my quilt clamps. It's just going to kind of hold it in place while it stitches out. Okay, now we have everything in place and we're ready to stitch this out. Now, when it finishes with this mermaid tail, again, it's going to go into another stitch where it starts stitching the outline of all of this. At that point, we will cut, so we don't have to watch it because it's very slow. Once you get this on, you just go ahead and hit the start button, and it's going to move right where it needs to go. And it's going to start stitching it. Sometimes the satin fabric can be kind of slippery. So if you see it getting like a little bubble in there, you just kind of smooth it out a little bit, let it stitch and do its thing. So we're going to cut while this stitches, and then we'll come back in a minute. Okay, so now it has finished stitching the mermaid tail, and now we have to trim this away before we move any further. So you can use, if you have batting scissors are really good for this because they have a blunt tip and they don't snag. You can use your vent edge scissors if you have these for embroidery. My favorite ones are these little tiny gingers. They have a vent edge. It's not exactly blunt, but it's very good for cutting this fabric. So I'm going to go ahead and pull this clamp off and take out my pins that are holding this in place. And I'm going to take my scissors and we're going to cut away. The idea is you want to cut as close to the edge of the stitching as you can without cutting into the stitching. If you have good sharp scissors, you can get a really clean cut. And we'll just glide right through that. I like to hold, when I get it to this point, I'll hold it up. And then I can just sort of glide right across the top of that. And it goes right along the edge of the stitching without cutting into it. And then you snip away whatever loose threads you have. Now, to do this part and this part of it I will end up going behind the machine, just because it's easier. You got a little less of a stretch there. Okay, now I'm going to go behind the machine. I always try to keep the bent edge down and the pointed edge on the top. And it doesn't snag when you cut. Okay, now we'll just cut that away. Now, I can trim this up later, but this is good enough for now. You can see it's just cut very close to the edge. You just don't want to cut into those little stitches. Now, okay, now I'm going to get my extra scissors and all of this stuff off. I'm going to put my clamp back on, kind of smooth it out a little bit. There we go. Now, now it's ready to start stitching. This outer edge, what it's going to do is it's going to stitch a line right around the outside edge of these mermaid scales, and then it's going to come back in and do this zigzag stitch all the way around. So we'll get it started, and then we'll cut away and come back when it's finished. So I hit my continue, and it's going to come right here. Pick up the bobbin thread. Get those loose threads out. There we go. Now it's going to stitch all the way around. Now this is the part that really takes a while, is this zigzag stitch, but it's a very important stitch. This kind of helps hold all those layers of fabric together once we get this off the machine and we cut it away. So I'm going to let this stitch, and then we'll come back again. Stitching all the way around. I'm going to go ahead and cut my thread here. And now we're ready to stitch the second half. So since I don't have to roll this, I'm going to cut my fabric and move it over. So I've got my big blunt edge scissors here, and I'm going to cut this. And I'm going to bring this over, and I'm going to put it right beside the other one. I don't know if you guys can see this or not. This is the only thing I hate about working with this stuff, is all the fuzz that goes everywhere. It sticks to everything. It'll never get off of me. Here, I'll stick it to my sweater and clean it off later. So I like to put at least 3 pins in this so that it holds it really close to the edge of those red snappers. Just like that. Now, I'm going to put my clamps back on. I love these things. And I can see I've got a pretty good wrinkle running through the middle of this, so I'm going to pull this up just a little bit to kind of smooth that out. See, now that looks much, much better. Get my little pin in there. I don't need the other 2 clamps, so I'm going to put those away. Now the process for this side is going to be exactly like we did for the first one. When I hit continue here. Okay, so now we're done. Now I want to stitch the second half. So again, I forgot to put my side clamps on, so I'm going to do that here in a minute. There we go. Okay, so now I have my boundary created, and I can see my mermaid tail fits in there pretty well, but I'm going to kind of scooch it over a little bit because I don't want it right on the edge. So I'm going to pick it up. Oh, let me exit my boundary. Okay, so I'm going to pick this up and move it over to the center a little bit closer. That way I'm not right on the edge of that because I still want to put my clamps on there. I forgot to put them on a second ago. So you can see I moved it and it turned black, which means it's ready to sew. Now let me just throw my clamps on here real quick. And my husband made these for me, so they go right underneath the Velcro straps, and it kind of holds those up a little bit so that this doesn't get caught on the machine if it gets close to the edge. So kind of, and I don't like this to be tight. I just want to hold it up kind of out of the way a little bit. Okay, so now I've got the clamps on. I have everything set up on the screen and it's ready to go. I'm going to do the exact same thing that we did with the first one. We're not going to watch that one stitch, but I'll come back when they're both finished and then we'll talk about what to do next. Okay, so now we have both sides of our mermaid stitched out, and I've taken it off of the machine, and I've got it on my cutting table. We're going to cut this out. Now, what we want to do is cut right up. Can you come closer and show? We are going to cut right along this outside edge, and you want to cut close to it, but you want to make sure that you do not cut into it. I use a rotary cutter when I do this. Now, be fair warned, if you have never cut Minky before, the fluff from this goes everywhere. So, when you cut your Minky, you can do one of two things. You can cut it and then vacuum it, or like right after you cut, or you can just cut everything and then when you're done, get your vacuum and vacuum your mat. Because you're going to have this fluff every place. You'll see here in a minute. So I just use a standard rotary cutter for this. If you are more comfortable with your scissors, you can cut it by hand. I'm pretty quick with the rotary cutter and it doesn't bother me, so that's what I'm going to use. So I'm going to cut in here, and then we're going to get right up on the edge of this, and I hold one side with my left hand while I'm cutting with the right. That way I can kind of pull away as I'm cutting. It works very well. You have good control. And we're going to do this all the way around. Again, you want to be right on the edge of that, but you want to make sure that you don't cut into it. And I'm going to go ahead and cut to separate these two pieces so that it's a lot easier for me to work with. I'm going to do a rough cut along this just so that I can separate it. Then I can turn it around. Set that down on the floor. Okay, see now it makes it a little easier to get hold of. When you're coming around this tail, you want to follow that curve really nicely. Just don't cut into your stitches. And if you don't get right on the edge of it, it's okay. You can always trim anything that's in your way. You can trim that back later. Okay, now we'll do this side. Now if you take a look at my mat here, you'll see this is all of the Minky fluff that I'm talking about. If you just swept all that off the table, you would have dust flying everywhere. So when I'm done trimming this, we'll get out a vacuum cleaner and we'll suck all that stuff up before it goes airborne. It's easier to clean. Okay, so on this tail can be a little tricky to get to with the rotary cutter. I'm going to do my best with the rotary cutter, but again, if you are more comfortable with a pair of scissors, you can just do this with a pair of regular scissors. In fact, I'll probably trim on the inside just to get very close to the edge. Okay, now let me get out my good scissors here. These scissors that I'm using are a Ginger. I believe they are a 4-inch blade. These are probably my most frequently used hand scissors. They have a great blade and they just cut through everything. I haven't had really any problems. So I'm going to come right along the edge here and just trim off some of those. When you're into these curves, into this area in here, you really want to be able to trim kind of close to that, because when you get ready to turn this inside out, you want to have all of this cleaned up in there. So I try to snip away whatever I can to try to keep that cut edge clean. See, rotary cutters are really hard to use to get inside these tight curves. If you have a smaller rotary cutter, that might work a little better than this 45. Okay, now, for the most part, that looks really good on this one. So we're going to cut away. I'm going to vacuum up this mess and cut my second half. And then when I have them both cut out, we'll come back and we'll finish the rest. See you in a minute. Okay, so we are back. I have both of the mermaids completely stitched and all cut out. And you can see right along the edge here, I have just most of the trimming is right along the edge of that stitching. And so now we're going to put it all together and pin it so that we can turn it into one. So with your two sides, you're going to take them and put them right sides together, and now we're going to pin it starting at the top and working our way down. You're going to want to get closer for this. Okay, so what I want to do is we're going to take this pin and put it right in the corner of that stitching, and then you're going to match that up with right in the corner of the stitching on the other side. Okay, now we're going to pin that just like that. We're going to do this just like that all the way down. I'm going to pick a few spots in between that I know I can match up on the other side and pin it. And probably about every 5 or 6 inches or so, I'll pick a spot. You don't really need a ton of pins in this, but you do want enough in there to be able to hold it steady as you are sewing it on the domestic machine. And it's better if you try to line these patterns up. That way when you get down to the curvy section, everything will just really fit together nicely. Now from here to here, I'm going to jump all the way down here to the end, and I'm going to pick this spot here, and I'm going to line it up with that spot there and pin it. Now I'm just going to drop a couple pins in between on this curve. Trying to find my points to line them up. Okay, now when you get down here around this curve, on the tail, I'm going to drop one pin on the very tip of this, right about in the center, and then I'm just going to come back and put a couple pins in the middle. Like I said, you just want enough to hold this together that it doesn't get shifty when you're trying to stitch it on the domestic machine. Now, on this tail, where these curves, you have the hits and the valleys of the curve, I'm going to put one in all the way across. It's not really necessary for you to pin in both the hips and the valley, so you can pick one or the other, whatever one you feel is going to work better for you. And if you're not familiar with the term, the hits and the valleys are the outs, or the hills are the out, hips are the out, and the valleys are the in. I can't talk today. Now I'm going to turn this around because it's easier for me to pin going the other direction. Okay, so now we're going to do the same thing on this side that we did on the opposite side. I'm going to go ahead and get this one pinned in place. And let me go ahead and get this in up here. So all of these spots where you see this zigzag stitching, you're gonna, when we stitch this, you're gonna want all of that to be on the other side of the needle. Like, you don't want any of this to show when you flip the mermaid tail inside out. So we will set our needle position so that when we're stitching this, all of this is on the left side of the needle and everything else will be on the right. Okay, I'm going to get my domestic machine set up, and then we'll talk about the settings for that machine in just a minute. Okay, we are back. I have my Bernina set up to do the final stitching on this. And I want to talk a little bit about how we're going to stitch this. So I'm going to set my stitch length to about 2.75 or 2.8. 2.75 is good. This is a lot of fabric to stitch through, so if you widen that stitch length just a little bit, it's going to be a little bit easier to go through all of those layers. Now, you have an option of moving your needle over to the left or right if you want, but I'm just going to I'm using my, let me see here. That was not the button I meant to push. Okay, I was trying to push the foot up button. Okay, so you can see I am using my standard foot on this. Can you see through the glass here? Or okay, so this is just a standard foot. I have my 9mm stitch plate in there, and what I'm going to do is put this right underneath the edge, and this row of stitching that we have, the line that is closest to the inside of the mermaid, I am going to put this line of the foot right here. This line of the foot I'm putting right on that straight line of stitching, and I'm going to use this straight line of stitching as my guide as I stitch all the way down this. That puts the needle ever so slightly to the inside of that line, and then that way when we flip this inside out, that'll make certain that none of this shows when you flip it the other way. If you get too close to that and these are not perfectly aligned, then it's possible that you will end up seeing part of that stitching when you flip it inside out. So I try to avoid that. So I'm going to go ahead and start this, and at the very top it locked my stitches, and I'm going to do a couple back stitches forward and back just a little bit, just to make sure that those are good and locked in. And I'm just going to stitch it kind of slow all the way around. On the sides, because they're really long and straight, it's very easy to stitch through this quickly. You don't really have a lot of turns or anything that you have to follow. So this part goes really quick. When we get in these hips and valleys, you have a little bit more detail that you have to follow. So I kind of stitch it a little bit slower. Okay, now we're at the end. I'm going to do some back stitching on this just to make sure it's nice and tight and locked in. Okay, now we're going to go back over here to the table. We're going to clip inside some of these curves here to make it easier to, when we get ready to flip that inside out. So note where your stitch line is, and then just put a couple snips there on the inside. Make sure that you're not stitching through that line of stitching that you just put in there. It doesn't take much. You just want to be able to open those up a little so that your mermaid tail will lay nice and flat. If you accidentally snip through part of your stitching, just take it back to the machine and stitch again. Okay, now we've got all of that snipped a little bit. We are going to turn it inside out. The hardest part of turning this inside out is getting this tail to tuck in. And if you find that you have too much fabric here on the ends, you can snip around that just a little bit. Usually it doesn't bother me, so I just leave it alone. Okay, once we have it flipped, you just stick your hand back in there and push the tail out. So this stocking that I stitched, still thinking about Christmas here. This mermaid tail that I stitched was the small size. Of the four, this is the second to the smallest one. And this is probably good for a child up to maybe age maybe, I'm going to say 3 to 6 or 3 to 7, depending on their size. It's a pretty good size. Okay, so all of this looks really good. Now, the only thing that we have left to do is to stitch this edge right here. We want to be able to turn that so that we can get to that. I probably should have done that before I turned it inside out. I was all excited and wanted to see it. So here, let's do this. We're going to turn it partially inside out again. See, I get all excited. Okay, so on this top edge, what we want to be able to do is roll this to the inside so that we can conceal this raw edge of fabric. So you have these, your seam allowance that we have to deal with. You want to make sure that that stays flat when you turn this. So I like to do the edges first, that way I know I can control that. Now what we're going to do is we're going to turn this inside out about halfway, okay? Just about halfway, keeping that seam flat, and then we're going to fold it again. My guide that I follow is this top edge of stitching right here where you can see the top of the scales. This is what I want to be the top edge of where I roll it. So you roll it halfway, you roll it again till I can see the top edge of that stitching right along that edge right there. See, that's going to be perfect. Now I'm going to go ahead and put 2 pins in here. That's to hold that seam allowance down. And I'm going to do the same thing to the other side. I'm going to open that up and make sure it lays flat. Do halfway. And then flip it again. And I can see that top edge of stitching in both places. So I'm going to go ahead and put my pins in. Ooh, that butterfly pin is just about had it. Okay, now, because you're halfway rolled here and you're halfway rolled here, the rest of this is pretty much going to take shape on its own. You just go ahead and tuck that in and put in a couple pins. You really don't need a ton of pins. These aren't very big. If I can get a pin in every, I don't know, 5 or 6 inches or so, that's plenty. So across the top here, I guess I have 3, plus the ones that are on the side. I'll do the same thing to the other side. Okay, now we're going to take this back to the sewing machine and we're going to stitch and add a line of straight stitching right along the edge of this here. So I'm going to do that and then we'll be right back. Okay, so I am back at the machine. We're getting ready to do the stitch right along the edge of this, but I wanted to show you guys how I set the machine up for this. Again, I'm going to leave this at a, no, I think I'm going to change this to a 3 on the stitch length. But what you'll notice is that I've raised my machine up so that I have access to this free yarn. You want your fabric to be able to roll inside this, so that's important. So now, where this seam line is going to be the thickest, heaviest part to stitch. So I usually start probably about a 1/2 inch away from that. I don't like to start in the thickest part. It's hard on the machine. So I'm going to get this right in along the edge, and this time I'm going to line up the rolled hem, this side, with this line on the foot right here. And so I'm going to use this as my guide, and I'm just going to stitch it right along the edge of that. And it gets really thick around those, around the seams. So if you have, I call this a hump jumper. I don't know what everybody else calls it. But you might need to use one of those when you get in the heavy parts. Ooh, look at that. Bernina stitched right over it like it wasn't nothing. Alright. So we're going to go all the way around the edge of that. This is when you really come to appreciate that free yarn. Okay, now when I get up to this second seam, again, I want to give it a little bit of help and make sure that that's opened up and laying flat. See, very thick, very heavy. If you have a flat-felled foot, you could also stitch this with a flat-felled foot. That's really nice for pushing those seams down. And then when I get to the end of this is where I started from. I'm just going to give it a couple little back stitches and cut that. Alright, and with that, we're done. Now we can flip it inside out for real. And we have this beautiful little mermaid tail. And put it back up. So thank you guys for hanging out with Quilt Artistry today, and hopefully we'll be back with another video soon. Have a great day.